Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for March 31st, 2025 from the Derby Hill Hawkwatch. I got out around 7 a.m. just before the rain started and started by watching the lake. The highlight of the lake watch was the first of season great egret. It was a day of changing weather. The morning started out warm with southerly winds, and overcast skies became a few hours of drizzle and then clearing to overcast again. Even when it was raining, we still had a decent push of the species that don't mind moving in such conditions, such as this northern harrier. Here's a pretty ragged-looking common raven that flew by. Here we have an asip, overall pretty lanky-looking, long tail with rounded tip, relatively large head. This is an adult Cooper's hawk. Here we have another asip, again pretty lanky-looking, wings held out very straight, a long tail, large head. Pretty ragged tip to the tail on this bird, so that makes it harder to judge. But looking at the streaking to the underside, we see kind of a teardrop streaking, more concentrated on the upper breast. This is a juvenile Cooper's hawk. Here we have a very cute looking duck with a square tail and a lot of white around the eye. This is a female wood duck. Here's another species that doesn't mind flying through the rain, and in fact, we had more of these while it was raining this morning than we had any other day this season so far. So we see a small raptor with very pointed wings. We should be thinking small falcon, and overall it's light underneath. This is an American kestrel. Here we have a raptor that's kind of pale looking overall. We see a relatively long tail, and we see some translucent crescents near the wingtips and some brown markings to the underside of the body. This is a juvenile red-shouldered hawk, and this was a lifer for a visitor today. Here we have another asip. Overall, this one looks kind of small and compact with a small head and very bulging secondaries. This is a sharp-shinned hawk. And if you look at the tip of the tail, you might say, well, that looks rounded like it would be on a Cooper's hawk. But really, if you folded this tail, you would see that all of these feathers would be about the same length. It's just if you fan out a tail that has feathers all the same length, it does get a little bit rounded. So it's one of those field marks that you just have to be a little bit careful with and learn to judge. And then the sun came out, and that's the moment that I knew it was probably going to be a huge day because of the way that the weather was setting up, where a warm front had come through and then a cold front was coming across. And let me just explain a little bit about this type of weather setup, because this is the perfect weather conditions for us to get a big flight here on the south shore of Lake Ontario. When I woke up this morning, the temperatures were warm. We were within that warm air mass. The warm front had passed, and we had warm southerly winds. Now, associated with that, we had some rain, and that's very common. So I think the rain tends to scare people away from coming out to the Hawkwatch, but often on these really big days, there is rain at some point. It's perfectly normal. What we need is for that rain to end, and then we get a gap before the cold front hits. And that's exactly what we got today. We had a few hours of rain in the morning, and then the rain stopped. And not only did we have the rain stop, but we had the sun come out. So we had a few hour window where you can imagine we had southerly winds that were pushing raptors up towards the lake shore. They hit Lake Ontario and they don't want to go out over the water. So they follow the lake shore heading east until they can get around the lake, and then they'll continue north. So we constantly have that southerly wind bringing raptors up to the lake shore. And with thermals, that helps get raptors like turkey vultures up and flying. Now, on top of that, there's a cold front coming across from the west. I think in the morning it was somewhere off to the west of Rochester, and then it was making its way across. And so we had a few hour gap after the rain ended where we had southerly winds bringing raptors up to the lake shore, and then a cold front coming across from west to east. And the cold front brings sort of a gusty change to the wind. Really what it's doing is that cold air is cutting underneath the warm air above. So there's kind of a push ahead of the front from this rising warm air as the cold air slides underneath. And on top of that, sort of the strong westerly tailwind from the wind shift. It's just sort of a perfect combination to be sweeping up a huge number of raptors that have accumulated along the lakeshore. And that's when you get the really high concentrated pushes. And that's exactly what we got today. And it's the same conditions we had exactly 3 years ago today when I was at the Braddock Bay Hawkwatch, and we had a day with 10,000 turkey vultures. And it's also the same weather setup we had last spring at Braddock Bay when we had a single hour with more than 10,000 broad-winged hawks. So this type of weather pattern where you have the warm front come through followed by a cold front, if you get that gap of a few hours where it's dry and God forbid the sun comes out, that's when you get the really, really big flights, and that's what happened today. Once that sun came out, the turkey vultures got up and kept coming and coming and coming. And the one downside of being the counter on such a big day like this is I don't really have the opportunity to take a lot of photos. So actually, this is the only photo of turkey vultures I took the whole day. It was just a quick photo with my cell phone. And then I also captured a short video to try to capture just a few seconds of what the flight looked like. But it was a really steady flight line, mostly out towards the lake, sometimes overhead, also a minor flight line inland. So it's typical that you get multiple flight lines on a day like this. But with the winds being more southwesterly, that's a wind that tends to push the raptors and turkey vulture lines out over the lake a little bit. They're willing to cut the corner of the lake on those southwesterly winds, as opposed to southeasterly winds, which usually keep them more directly overhead for us. So the flight line was a little bit high and off to the lake, so it's hard to be documenting them when you have to count so many when they're kind of distant like that. Plus, on top of counting all the turkey vultures, I'm trying to pick out all the red-tailed hawks and the sharp-shinned hawks and the northern harriers. So it's just a lot of chaos, and it's difficult to try to thoroughly document. But hopefully, this picture captures a little bit. If you can imagine this kind of line of turkey vultures stretching back to the horizon as far as you can see. Here's a sandhill crane that migrated high overhead. Notice that cranes hold their necks out straight compared to great blue herons, which usually fly with their neck curved into an S. There were also quite a few eastern phoebes passing through today. I counted at least 8, but there were probably even more. Here we have a hawk gliding high overhead. We see a belly band and we see dark patagial bars. This is a red-tailed hawk. Here we have another red-tailed hawk, but notice how much bigger and darker the belly band is on this bird compared to that previous one. And we also see a dark throat. So this is likely from the northern subspecies of red-tailed hawk. And let me just flip back to that other red-tail for a second. You can see this is more of the typical eastern or borealis subspecies, but just part of the variation of the different red-tailed hawks that we see here at Derby Hill. Here we have a small raptor with pointed wings. We should be thinking small falcon, and we see a lot of dark streaking underneath, and we see a dark tail with some thin white bands to it. This is a merlin. In the noon hour, it clouded over again as that cold front got closer and closer. And actually ahead of the cold front, we had a nice line of high turkey vultures directly overhead, a few hundred of them pushing ahead of the cold front. We also had this raptor very high overhead and bent into an M shape, which is a distinctive shape of an osprey. The cold front hit hard right at 12:45, bringing a switch to strong, gusty west-northwest winds and a dramatic drop in the temperature. As soon as the cold front hit, the flight line overhead dried up, but a minute or so later, I was scanning around and I noticed a big flight line of turkey vultures inland. So in this photo, we're looking towards our number 9 marker, which is looking pretty much due south in towards our south lookout. And this was taken a few minutes afterwards, so there's no birds in this photo, but it was just an endless line of turkey vultures. Over the course of a few minutes, I counted about 1,300 turkey vultures. And then just as suddenly as they started, that flight line dried up as well. From the north lookout, I had 59 species. At 1 o'clock, I made the switch to the south lookout since the winds now had a northerly component, and it remained overcast the rest of the day with those colder northwesterly winds, and a bit of a flight did pick up. A few hundred more turkey vultures came through, but most of the migration of the day pushed through ahead of the front. We did have some interesting non-raptor highlights, including some flocks of horned larks. While going through my photos this evening, I noticed that one of the birds in the flock was actually a Lapland longspur, the first of the season. And you might be questioning how you can tell from this photo. Well, you can kind of make out the facial pattern of it. And just to be sure, I ran it through the Merlin app and it confirmed that it's a Lapland longspur. And we had the head of Merlin out at the Hawkwatch today, so I don't dare question it. Here we have a bird with pointed wings, but this is not a falcon. Rather, this is a shorebird. We see a relatively short bill. This is a plover, and we see a double breastband. This is a killdeer. Here we have a water bird with a dark head with a long pointed bill, very thin pointy wings, and trailing feet. This is a common loon in breeding plumage. And the one interesting thing about loons is that while most other birds are going along the lake shore, so headed east or west, the loons pretty much just head straight out over the lake heading north. Throughout the afternoon, we had a few more osprey pass by. They're just so distinctive with that black and white plumage and lanky shape. We also had some migrating groups of double-crested cormorants heading towards the lake. And this cute little sparrow paid us a visit at the South Lookout, giving us a really close look. We see kind of a thin pointed bill, and we see some yellow here in front of the eye and thin streaking to the upper breast. This is a savanna sparrow. Here's a good quiz bird to end on. Looking at the overall shape of this bird, I would say it's in the Buteo genus, although the wings do look a little bit long and skinny. And looking at the overall coloration of this bird, we get some blacks and whites, and it's kind of creamy looking overall. And if we look at the areas that are darker, it's the belly, and we also have these kind of darker carpal patches here, carpal squares. And also it has a dark tip to the tail. So this is a light morph rough-legged hawk. From the South Lookout, I had 39 species. In total today, I had 65 species. There were 2 new species for the season today, which were great egret and Lapland longspur, bringing us to a total of 102 species for the season. Taking a look at the hawk count report for our migrating raptor totals, today we had 4,136 turkey vultures, 13 ospreys, 6 bald eagles, 31 northern harriers, 58 sharp-shinned hawks, 8 Cooper's hawks, 5 red-shouldered hawks, 41 red-tailed hawks, and 2 rough-legged hawks. And for falcons, we had 37 kestrels and 2 merlins for a total of 4,339 migrating raptors, the biggest day so far this season. That brings the season total and final March total to 18,303. And if we compare that to previous years, we see that that's actually the highest March total ever for the Derby Hill Hawkwatch. You can see there's some previous years up around 14,000. And actually the highest previous March was way back in 1995 when just over 15,000 hawks were counted. Taking a look at some individual species, this was the highest March total ever for turkey vultures with more than 15,000. The previous high was just over 11,000. Also the highest March ever for ospreys with 33, which is a lot higher than other recent years. And good numbers of other species too, like harriers and sharpies and red-shouldered hawks. So really good start to the season. We had a lot of southerly winds throughout March. And even though the month started out really cold, as you may remember, there were a couple feet of snow on the ground when I started, but we just had a lot of favorable weather conditions for raptors to be migrating. So spectacular start to the season. We're now 1/3 of the way through, and I'm looking forward to what April and then May will bring. Taking a look at the forecast for tomorrow, it's looking mostly cloudy in the morning and then becoming sunny with temperatures colder in the mid-30s and northwest winds at 10 to 20 miles per hour. So with those winds, I'll be down at the South Lookout and we might get a bit of a cleanup flight of turkey vultures, but I wouldn't expect much migration otherwise. Looking ahead to Wednesday, it's looking cloudy with some rain moving in the afternoon and a high in the mid-40s. East-southeast winds at 10 to 20 miles per hour, so that's a good wind, and I would expect a pretty good flight for Wednesday. For Thursday, it's looking like that rain will be ending early in the morning, then it will remain cloudy, much warmer with a temperature reaching the mid-60s and south-southwest winds at 10 to 20 miles per hour. So again, another day with good southerly winds. Would expect another big flight for Thursday, but we'll check in again as we get closer. All right, I think I've already talked enough in this video and said everything that needs to be said. Another great day of hawk watching out at Derby Hill. And it looks like we'll have some more great days of hawk watching coming up, so I hope to see you out soon. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.